Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Windows WinUI community call. I am your host, Michael A. Hawker, also known as the XAML Llama, thus the Hat. We're really happy to have you all here today for our call. And we've got a lot of great content for you, so I'm really excited. And so hopefully everything is going to be working well. And let's just quickly jump into what we plan to talk to today. We have some great new features. The 1.5 release just happened last week. So we're going to be covering some of the new features within there. And then we have some demos about some performance improvements and how to do debugging with the latest updates in 1.5. So really kind of give you some great tools in your toolbox about understanding what's going on within your applications and really help you level up. And then we're going to be covering some of the things that we plan to work on in 1.6 and the roadmap there. And then, as usual, have some time for questions and for us to answer those. And so, as we've been doing these calls. We know it's been a little while. We appreciate your patience from last fall. We were just kind of revamping and figuring out our plans, and we've already bookmarked June 5th for the next call date. So put that in your calendars. And if you have any questions here about what we're talking today, feel free to post those in the YouTube chat, and we'll be looking out for those and try to get to your answers near the end of the call. There's usually a lot of questions, so we might not get to them all, but we'll have opportunities for you and links for you to follow up with us after, and we will try to follow up with you on GitHub after if we don't have time to get to your question today. And we also have our social accounts, Windows UI, Windows Dev. We have our GitHub, so always welcome to hear from folks there as well. So if you are, hopefully you're familiar with WinUI, that's why you're here. And but if you're new to this space, then WinUI is our modern UX platform here for .NET and C++ apps, offers the latest styling, runs on modern hardware and devices, and powers many of the apps that you might be using today. And WinUI 3 is the latest generation of this technology and stack. It's decoupled from the operating system and is included with the Windows App SDK. So whenever we're talking about WinUI these days, this is the latest version that we're going to be referring to. If you see anything related to WinUI 2, that was the previous generation, that was just basically the control library for UWP. So those are the main differences to keep in mind there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things off to Karen to talk about the latest features in the 1.5 release. Karen, welcome to the call.
Hello. Yeah, cool. Can everyone hear me fine? I'm holding
Yeah,
the mic here.
we hear you loud and clear.
Okay,
So I will
perfect.
let you introduce yourself, and we will dive right in here.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Karen. I'm a dev on the WinUI team, and I'll be going over the new features in 1.5. So a few of them we want to highlight would be command bar icon labels, as you can see in File Explorer, new controls like map control, and selector bar and selector bar item. So can get into a bit of a story with command bar icons, command bar icon labels. So as you can see on the left side, that was the previous generation of the labels in command bar in File Explorer. We got a lot of feedback on how difficult it was to figure out what those icon mean. You kind of have to go through a little mental exercise to interpret what they mean to know what you're clicking through. So File Explorer obviously took that feedback and collaborated with us on the WinUI team to add that feature to have labels in command bar flyout. So yeah, the feedback has been fantastic, as you can see from more of the Twitter feedback. And File Explorer learned that in general, labels are a best practice and can really only be skipped if the icon is so common it's embedded in the global lexicon, so to speak. So yeah, here it is, the icons. And next I want to go over the new samples in WinUI Gallery. So the first one is map control, and then selector bar and selector bar item. Cool. So, okay. So yeah, as you can see, this is the new home screen for the new WinUI Gallery. So let's get into map control. So here, you would need a Azure Map Service token to be able to play around with it. So let me add that there. Token. So yeah, as you can see, you can pan around, you can zoom in, and let's take a look at the code to see how the pin is set. So you would just add the map control and XAML, and then be able to set a basic geo position of the default value and be able to set a basic geo position in code behind. Cool. Now let's get into selector bar and selector bar item. So obviously, after many threads and discussions on Pivot being deprecated in 2021, we finally have its successor, the selector bar. So just a few differences to note is that the selector bar is very simple. So as you can see here, this is the XAML for it. It does not contain the content children, unlike Pivot. So yeah. So as you can see here, this actually gives us more flexibility because it allows us to bind its content and also, through pages, etc., and or different items through items view. So yeah, let's get into the code. So as you can see here we have the selector bar and selector bar item, and then you kind of do a switch case to go through different sample pages, and you could do a slide transition for the pivot animation effect. And here it's the same thing. You have a selector bar item and an items view accompanied with it. And you would go through different if-else statements and set the item source depending on what is selected for the selector bar item. So as always, give these features a try and let us know your experience by submitting feedback through GitHub or Twitter or X, whatever it's called.
So thanks so much, Karen. Really great to see the new features coming that have come in 1.5. And now I'm going to introduce everyone to George here, who's going to talk about some of the performance updates from 1.5 as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is George, and I work on the WinUI team. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about performance. So this is fairly demo heavy. Let me share my screen. Okay, so when we're talking performance, typically we're talking measurement and analysis. And on the WinUI 3 team, our preferred tool of choice is the Windows Performance Recorder and the Windows Performance Analyzer. These are both public tools. You can get them online already. Just search for them, and they'll also be linked from learn.microsoft.com. Recorder is the tool that takes the perf trace, and Analyzer is the tool that opens the perf trace so you can have a look at what's going wrong. So let's start with the recorder, and we'll take a trace of WinUI gallery. Taking a trace used to be pretty involved. You need a file that specifies what all the events that you're looking for, and then you have command line tools that start and stop the trace. With the Windows Performance Recorder, things are much easier. You just check some boxes and click Start. The boxes you want, first level triage, you want CPU usage if you're talking about responsiveness. And this one down here is important. This is XAML activity. WinUI 3 is an evolution of XAML, and we use the same providers. So if you check this box, you get WinUI 3 events as well. After you're set, you just click Start, and then you run your repro. We will launch WinUI 3 gallery, and we'll just go to some pages and quit out of it. Let's look at navigation view. That's going to load, and then we'll come down to selector bar, click around, and we're good to go. Hit save, give your trace a name, and click save. This workflow is fairly streamlined. After it's done saving, you're going to see a button here that opens the trace directly in WPA, so you can just go and analyze it. Let's talk a bit about WPA. WPA is the Windows Performance Analyzer, and it is a behemoth of a tool. There are tables everywhere, there are rows everywhere, and it's very easy to get lost. So from that perspective, it's much better to go in knowing what you're looking for. Here's the button. I'm going to open the trace. It's much better to go into WPA knowing what you're looking for rather than try to browse through and see if something jumps out at you. With that in mind, it's a good time to talk a bit about WinUI architecture. WinUI is a retain mode system, meaning the app describes a tree of UI elements to WinUI, and then WinUI renders and lays out that tree. We do this work on the UI thread in batches we call frames. And you want a frame to be as fast as possible because it directly stands in the way of your changes hitting the screen. Not only that, if your frame runs late, it means you're holding up the UI thread, which means it can't do things like process keyboard input or process mouse input, which makes the responsiveness look even worse. So WinUI logs the beginning and the end of each frame. So that's what you're looking for in the trace. And in particular, there are some frames that are more important than others. If you're just mousing around, then that's a small change in the tree. But the very first frame in the app is important because without it, nothing hits the screen. It's also one of the more expensive frames because everything in the tree is new. So there's no work to be saved here by tracking what changed. Let's have a look at the generic events table. So lots of rows. The Microsoft Windows XAML provider is what you want. This is the thing that contains all the XAML events. You can filter for it, or you can just expand it. I'm going to expand it, and then I'm going to filter for the process. I'm going to drag the process column over. WinUI gallery is the process I'm looking at. I'll expand that. And then I want the task called frame, which represents all the frames. And it's here. So I'm going to filter for this to not show anything else. And I'm going to get some real estate here because my screen resolution is fairly small. You want to drag this yellow bar over. Everything to the left of the yellow bar is grouping. Everything to the right expands. So hit this arrow, and there's a list of all your frames. And we can even hide this graph up top to get more space. So pretty quickly, you see the problem, except it's not a perf problem you see, it's the tool problem. You're looking for the duration of each frame, but you're just given a raw list of start and stop timestamps. So if you want the length of a frame, you got to bust out your calculator. And that does not scale with as many frames that the app renders. So it's nearly impossible to get an overview of what your app's doing for the duration of the trace. With that problem in mind, we created a plugin for WPA, and I will show that. It's available down here. It's called XAML Frame Analysis. And let's have a look at this. You get a similar view, expand by process, and here's a thread, and we can drag type over. We're looking for the type of frame. We'll hide the graph. So that right there, that's your overview. This plugin went and looked at all the, it looked at all the raw data, and then it calculated all the durations. And you can see all frames if you want. We'll expand this, get the frame. Here we go. So that's a list of every frame that WinUI Gallery produced. Startup, this very big expensive frame took over a second. And you can even sort by this to figure out what are some of the other expensive frames that are involved. And from here, you can bring back the graph. You click your expensive frame, you right click in the graph and zoom in, which focuses the entire view on this area. And at this point, you can bring in the other tables like CPU sampling or generic events and dig in and see what took so long. Now, this plugin is not yet public. We're hoping to make it public in a preview release in the near future. With that in mind, let's talk about some of the perf work that we did in WinUI 3. I'll start with a demo of tree view. We'll bring up a couple of repro apps and a clock. So this was a case where we took a slow scenario, we pointed WPA at it, and we profiled it. On the right is the new tree view, on the left is the old tree view, and we'll start a clock. This is a simple app, but it's not a small app. There are 10,000 tree view children in each of these. So altogether, there are 100,000 tree view items, and we're just going to check them. Start the clock, check, and check. What we saw from WPA is we were spending a long time looking through the selected index. Before anything gets selected, we want to make sure it's not in there already. And we were just making this check over and over again redundantly. So then we went and we took out all the redundant checks and we looked at it and we profiled it again and things became much faster. There's a similar situation with remove where we look through that right too many times. So we can see it's done about 20 seconds in 1.5. Last time I tried this in 1.4, it took 12 minutes. So we're not going to wait for that. We've done other perf work as well. We've done work around resource dictionary access. We've done work around get activation factory and around looking up string resources. We've also worked with our first-party app partners to help improve startup times for their apps. And we realized that looking at perf is by no means easy. So we're hoping to make some documentation available along with this plugin and how to use it in the near future. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks for your time. And next, we'll turn it over to Scott to talk about improved crash debugging. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, George. That was great. And now we have Scott joining us here to give us some more insights into debugging our applications with the Windows App SDK. Take it away, Scott.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott, and last October, with Windows App SDK 1.4, we began publishing the WinUI source code to GitHub. One of the reasons that we did that was to improve debugging support. In addition to the source code, we began publishing the full unstripped symbols, the PDB files, to the Microsoft public symbol server. So this is part of the journey towards open sourcing the Windows App SDK. Again, this is just the WinUI source code and is just making the source available. Okay, what I'd like to do is to walk through a very simple contrived example that demonstrates how having the source code and the public symbols can improve the debugging experience. So here we have a XAML app with a simple user control. And if we take a look at the implementation of measure override, we see that it's returning a size with a negative height. All right, so let's just go ahead and run this. We're not interested in seeing the user interface of this app. We just want to see what happens when this control is initialized and the measure override is called. So we'll let that begin running. And sure enough, there's a problem. So the negative number has created an exception, and that has propagated out to the user's unhandled exception handler, which is automatically enabled unless you turn it off. So here we are in the XAML provided unhandled exception handler. And the exception arg-e, let's unpack that and see if we have any useful information. All right, it says that there's an exception. There was a non-negative number required for the parameter height. So that's a fairly informative and helpful message. Let's expand that exception argument. And then as we scroll down, we see that, in fact, there's even stack trace information. We can see at the top of the stack is a call to the Windows Foundation size constructor. So this is fairly helpful. From this, we should have enough information to diagnose the problem. So let's take a look at a little more complex scenario here. Let's, well, first of all, let's go and take a look at the size constructor just to confirm our suspicions. As we take a look at the width property assignment, we see that, yes, indeed, if the value is negative, then we throw an argument out of range with the name of the parameter. We do the same thing for height. Okay, so that explains the behavior we just saw. Now let's change the parameter for height from a negative number to not a number. Again, this is contrived, but imagine you've got some complex layout arithmetic and you're generating numbers. You could easily divide by 0 or something. You could have a negative infinity, positive infinity, not a number, one of these kinds of scenarios. So we're just setting this up artificially to see what happens now if we run this. And while we're waiting for this to build, I'll just point out too that while this is a C# demo, I picked C# because it's the more common, more popular language for Windows App SDK customers. But the same applies to C++. In fact, this demo with C# is even a little more complex. So with C++, it's simpler because we're not dealing with managed debugging. But it's the same experience. You'd have the same unhandled exception handler called and so on. All right, I think this is just about nearly done building. And let's go ahead and run that. Okay, again, we're not interested in the app user interface. We just want to see the result of that not a number being passed in. All right, so once again, we've had our unhandled exception handler. Once again, let's explore the event args and see what we have to deal with. Well, not so much in this case. The exception says unspecified error. That's not terrifically helpful. Let's expand that. All right, the error code is 800040005. Which, as I'm sure you all know, is efail, which is a very general unspecified error. So that's not really helpful either. We scroll down here. We don't have a stack trace. We don't have source. We really don't have anything to go on. There's really not much we can grab onto here to diagnose to know what's going on in our code. So this is where the source availability really, I think, helps. So let's make a few changes here. Let's go to Tools, Options. Let's look at our debugging symbols. All right, I want to make sure that my Microsoft symbol servers, the public symbol servers, are enabled. And then I want to just limit the symbols that I pull down to the single Microsoft UI XAML PDB. So this will save a little bit of time. All right, let's turn those on. Now I want to go to my launch settings. I could do this through the user interface as well. And I want to turn on mixed mode debugging here so that I can see native crashes. All right, now let's go ahead and run this again. Okay, and we see right away that it's pulling the symbol for Microsoft UI XAML DLL, the PDB file, down from the public MSDL Microsoft.com symbol server. So this is about a 280 megabyte. It's a full PDB file again, so that it's not stripped. So we've got full stack information here for debugging purposes. Okay, one step that I forgot to do, so we're going to run this again. We want to add a breakpoint. So we want to add a breakpoint for on failure encountered in Microsoft UI XAML DLL. This is the entry point that all errors funnel through before they are surfaced to the application. So this gives us an opportunity to get a line of sight into the error synchronously as it's detected before it's asynchronously routed to that unhandled exception handler. So here we are, an on failure encountered, and then we can see in the call stack, yes, indeed, we have complete symbol information. Let's double click on the call that's calling into that. Okay, on failure. Let's look at the next one down, measure override from core. Aha, And there we see the source and what's happening here. As we see, I've pinned the value of desired size. We see its value of 123 for the width that we passed in, and we see not a number for height. And then we see a comment, enforced measure override cannot return infinity or nan. So if we scroll up a little bit more, then we see the call to measure override protected on line 246. Now this would have been the call that had our size constructor thrown an exception, as it did with a negative number. This would have propagated out at this point, creating that stowed exception that gets routed to the unhandled exception handler. In this case, because it was not negative, but not a number, we fell through to this. Now I'm telling a little bit on myself here with this line of code, this to-do throw exception. We could do better here. We could surface a stowed exception that had more useful debugging information. But we have a couple of, I'll just be honest, we have some places like this in the code that need a little attention still. So until that happens, we have a story for how we can improve the debugging experience here. We've got a full stack with all the frames. We have access to local variables. This is actually based upon a real world example. One of you all reported this to me last year, and I needed a time travel trace to be able to track this down. It's either that or a mini dump or something of that nature. Now with the public symbols, you can take a snapshot of this. You can grab some local variable values, and you can create an issue on GitHub that's a lot more informative, that doesn't have to reveal private information, and we can hopefully improve the debugging turnaround time. And that's it. That's the demo I had to show you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott. Some great insights there. Unfortunately, we lost a few of the child windows of the settings you were showing. So I was telling folks in chat that we will follow up with this with a post, either as a blog or on the docs, with a more step-by-step guide to kind of really walk through what you've shown us today, because it's a really great insight and help on how to deal with these types of issues. Everyone in chat has experienced this before, so we're really hoping that we can continue to improve these experiences from release to release, and in the meantime, at least give people the tools that they need to understand a little bit more about what's going on when they hit this problem. All right, and I will introduce here, thanks, Scott. I will introduce here Michael. Mike, welcome to the call, and you're going to be covering what's coming next.
Yes, hi everybody, I'm Mike. I'm an engineer on WinUI and WindowsAppSDK, and I get to talk about what we're planning on 1.6. So for the most part, that we're looking at 1.6 being into 4 focus areas. If we can proceed to the next slide here. There we go. So these are the 4 main focus areas that we're looking at doing the work in. Quality, improving performance. George talked about some of that, more work happening in 1.6. Better experience, how can we make things better by default? And also a bucket of things that are progressing in 1.6 but aren't expected to finish until 1.7 or later. So now to give some more examples in each of these categories. In the quality category, we're going to be looking at top issues, including a bunch of top issues in some of the controls, as well as looking at improving general reliability of the WinUp SDK installer. For performance, one of the biggest buckets is the C# native AOT. There's been a lot of work happening in 1.5. We're planning to get that enabled in 1.6. And we'll also be looking at continuing some of the stuff that George was talking about for improving performance in various areas that should impact all applications. For better experience, there are some things that we're looking at that'll be better experience for users by default, including better title bar, improving tab dragging experience, for example, and also looking at things for the better developer experience, such as better IntelliSense, improving x:bind support so that it's more compatible with what binding has, and other things in that category that hopefully will make it easier to be able to write applications and get the experience that you want. For progressing in 1.6, we're continuing work on table view, inking controls, and cross-process islands. All of those were happening in 1.5. They'll continue through 1.6. And we're also going to be working on smooth app resize support. So we're really excited about these improvements, but like I say, they're not expected to complete in the 1.6 timeframe. lots more is happening besides just the stuff that's shown here. This is just a high-level view of what's going on, but this is a quick view of the stuff that we're looking at. There's a link there at the bottom, AKMS WinUP SDK plans. I'll be updating that in a minute to point to a discussion on GitHub, which will also include this list and provide an opportunity for you to give feedback on 1.6 plans and also give feedback on what are the next things that we should be prioritizing. So looking forward to seeing what you think about our plans and focusing on what we need to do next.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you said you're going to update the link, so hopefully that will be live here in a few minutes for folks. And I can just actually I'll post that in chat after, along with our other link as well. So just going to make a note of that here so I don't forget. And we are to our Q&A portion of the call here. So if we've already been seeing some questions come through on YouTube, and so if you have other questions about what we've been talking here today, please feel free to add those into the chat. We've already seen some that we've already seen from GitHub as well, so lots of enthusiasm. And hopefully we'll be able to cover a few of them. There's always more questions than we have time to answer. So if we don't get to your question today, be assured we've been looking at them, and we will try and respond back on GitHub afterwards with hopefully some answers for you to your questions. So the first question we have here today was about how often we expect community calls to happen in the future. We have long gaps going forward, like there has been this last one, since our last one is in September. And how do we plan to engage better in the future? This was from Matt B. Dev on GitHub. And so that is a great question. We're back, we're live, and we hope to be at least doing these quarterly. We have, as I said, our next one set up in June, and that's so put that on the calendar, June 5th. That's our next one that'll be happening after build. So we hope to follow up from build and the work that we're putting into that coming up here. And basically, we are also planning, we'll have a link at the end of the call to a survey link to get more feedback about the call and how this one went, what we can do to improve, and how often you want to see these things. The cadence of a quarter works well with our planning and releases, and so that's kind of what we've been thinking right now. But we'll reevaluate after the June call and decide if we should do them more frequently or not, based on feedback and that we've been getting in our plans and how everything heads together. So hopefully that answers this question for you. And we've been really excited to put this content here to get together for you today, and hoping that you really find it interesting. And so for the next question, we have what kind of general improvements to XAML do we see going forward? This is from Atif Mahir. Sorry if I've about the pronunciation, but I'm going to hand this over back to Mike to answer for us.
Yeah, so hopefully the quick overview that I gave on 1.6 is representing a bunch of work that we're doing in XAML across all those focus areas. So we're certainly continuing to focus on improving XAML, both in terms of adding new features as well as just improving what we have today. We know there's a lot of rough edges, a lot of feedback that we have that we still need to get to. We'll be continuing to work on that for every release going forward. In the plans discussion that we are linking to, please give us feedback on what things we should be prioritizing going forward. We definitely want to continue to improve this space.
Great, thanks. And our next question is about open source. I'm going to hand that over to Scott, who was talking about that a bit during his demo as well.
Yes. So I did want to just clarify, when we speak about the source being published, we try to use the term source available to distinguish from open source. Open source carries with it a much broader implication in terms of the ability to build all the source, to run it locally, to run test code, to issue PRs, and so on. We all know that that's not the current state of the lifted UI XAML repo. We do collect issues, we have discussions, and we make the source available. And of course, we publish the symbols. The symbols are, as I mentioned before, they're not stripped. They're full symbols for all of the WinUI 3 DLLs. For other DLLs in Windows App SDK, some of them are unstripped, some of them are not. So it just depends. But this is a work in progress, and the hope at some point is that we'll be able to continue broadening our definition of making it open source.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And then our next question is about plans for drag and drop and elevated apps. And this is going to go back to Mike as well.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're not expecting to address drag and drop in elevated apps generically in the 1.6 timeframe. We do have some work that we're doing specifically for the tab view control, which we think should be able to get it working in elevated. So can't promise for sure that it fits in 1.6 yet, but we're hoping that that'll address that common scenario of being able to, drag around and drag out tabs.
Perfect. And I'm trying to remember if I have, no, that's the final slide. Let me go back here. And we have, that was our prepared questions from GitHub. We know there's a few more on GitHub. We'll get back to and reply to those, but we wanted to make sure we had time for live Q&A as well. So I'm going to pull everyone else in here to help us answer questions. And all right, our first question is if there's any plans to replace the map control with a native control instead of a WebView one for offline access from Skype. And I believe, Rajesh, were going to take this one?
Yeah, I can take that one. Hey everybody, I'm Rajesh. And really excited to be here on the call and see all the questions and the excitement. Keep that coming. So for the maps control, we're not planning on building a native one. We're working with the maps team. They have a really rich web-based control that we're trying to leverage and build a thin layer, WinUI control layer on top of that. So we're going down that path. There isn't an immediate plan to build a native control here.
Great, thanks, Rajesh. And then our next question is about selector bar from Jignesh. How is selector bar any different from the navigation top view mode if your content isn't bound to the items? And Rajesh or Karen, I suppose either one of you could take this question.
Yeah, I can take that, and if Karen has more, she can add. So we've had a lot of discussions on this, and we initially had Pivot, and we were recommending people use navigation view, the top navigation view. It turns out top navigation view is quite heavyweight, has a lot of features. You can do nesting, there's overflow. And in general, like if you have a scenario where you want some sort of navigation where you can go to the left or top, navigation view works great, but that comes with a perf cost. So the segmented bar is more of a lightweight solution there. So if you have very few items and you just want to show some UI that's simple and not take a perf hit, then selector bar is the answer there. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit.
Great. Karen, did you have more to add?
Oh, yeah. I also just want to add the WinUI gallery version I demoed is the one publicly in the store. So it's available for you guys to try out. Just tacking that in there.
Yeah, that was a question that came in chat. We were telling people that as well. So so great to know. And this is a question for Scott about if we can have the breakpoint in Visual Studio break further up the call stack in that point where it fails in the measure override code.
Yes, thank you, Dot Martin. That's a great suggestion, just to make it easier to track down. Yeah, I'll look into that. This is somewhat new, actually, trying to find ways to optimize for this debugging experience. So that's good feedback. Thank you.
Michael, if I can add to that, one of the things that we're doing, we're continuing to evolve this this solution as we go. That getting the source out there was really the first step. And then we added the unstripped symbols as a next step. In 1.5, we added the source locations, and so that all of the source sharing would link to the files themselves on GitHub and make it easy to load not only the symbols, but the source files on it as well. And so we're continuing to evolve the experience on all of this. One of the things that we mentioned in the 1.6 plans is going through and actually getting IntelliSense working the way that it should, and looking at that, improving the developer experience there. So it's continuing to evolve. I saw in the chat the phrase that debugging can be a death by 1,000 cuts. And we're looking to see how we can make improvements across the board on that and really improve the overall experience and make the whole platform easier to use. The other thing that I saw that was not covered is, when is 1.6 coming? And so we're looking at roughly the third quarter of the year, so late summer, early fall, for coming in that. And one other schedule item is we are going ahead and doing the servicing updates. So the first servicing update for 1.5 will be coming in conjunction with Patch Tuesday, roughly next week. So continuing to do bug fixes. We've been seeing the feedback on GitHub and the issues that have been filed on 1.5 already. And we've got some good fixes coming in 1.5 for those issues. More the maps issue was one of those that we looked at. And there are a few others that are in there as well, and just continuing to improve the platform as we go.
Thanks, Bob. That's great. Kind of a follow-up to that about 1.6 is asking about native AOT, and if there's any chance to that before 1.6.
We would love to.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, we'd love to. That's right. It is a significant feature, and we generally have not introduced significant new features in patch releases, which is the only thing that remains before 1.6 is released, would be 1.5 patch releases like 1.5.1. And beyond that, there's just a fair amount of work to do. So I imagine that we'll be pushing right up against it. I understand there's a lot of pent up desire for this feature. So we want to land it right, and we don't want to hurry it, but we understand that it's urgent. So we're targeting 1.6 is not too late and not too early.
In addition, I would say the changes that we're making for this support include getting a new updating the version of CS-WinRT, going through and fixing issues with trimming. We've got some compiler changes. So it's a substantial number of changes in order to make this work. And most of those are not things that we would want to put into a servicing release for stability reasons and just to get that in. So we are looking, as Scott said, we are looking to get this in quickly and give everyone a chance to get their hands on it as soon as possible. But we also want to make sure that the 1.5 platform is stable and that we're not going to have any issues with existing apps.
Great, thanks. And then our next question is for Chigusa about OAuth and
Yes.
about web. I think Web App Broker was asking in the chat and around those types of features.
Yeah, so we did recently update the documentation that's titled "What's Supported When Migrating from UWP to WinUI 3," and it has a link to the alternative API that you could use. So we would like you to try that out and then let us know if that's not sufficient. But we believe that that should solve your problem. Unfortunately, we wanted to link that in the YouTube, but it didn't let us. So, so just search for that title, please.
Great. Thanks, Chigusa. And just give me a second to catch up here.
And while you're doing that, Michael, I just wanted to circle back as well to the source availability. I think Dot and Morton also asked about searchability. Yeah, we're aware of that. We're aware that the current system of publishing the source to a WinUI release 1.5 or 1.4 branch impacts the ability to search for source. So we'll see if we can get that addressed shortly.
Yeah, I'm trying to find his comment here. There's been many questions, and it's been a little hard for me to keep up here. So we have some feedback for our process next time, because it's been really helpful. I hope for everyone to have the comments highlighted on the stream. And so and let me queue up another question here, and I think this is kind of maybe related to that, Scott, so I'll add it here as well, is kind of any plans to make other parts of the Windows App SDK source available, like the storage APIs?
We'd love to make it all available, ultimately. There's a lot of moving parts to the Windows App SDK. There are parts of it that are built as part of our internal Windows build process. And so we're on this journey of lifting, as we say, these pieces of source code up and out of Windows. So, but it's a big deal to move parts of Windows into open source projects on GitHub and so forth. So, but that is the goal. Of course, we started with the foundation portion was open source to begin with. Now WinUI is. So that's the journey. Is the intent is to continue to do this.
The one part that I'd like to add to this is WinApp SDK also has you still using lots of Windows APIs that release as part of the OS. So for example, the storage APIs are part of Windows, not part of Windows App SDK. And none of the rest of that Windows code is planned currently to become source available.
Great. Thanks for the input there. And so one of our next questions here is around if there's support for using the Windows App SDK outside of Visual Studio. I'm assuming this was referring to building or tooling. And Scott, I know you were commenting on this earlier before the call as well.
Right. Yeah, so oftentimes when people ask this question, what they're really asking is, are there other build systems that we can support, such as CMake? There really isn't any dependency that Windows App SDK has on Visual Studio, no direct dependency. You can do everything from the command line that you can do, modulo a few bugs, that you can do in Visual Studio. There might be some Visual Studio build optimizations, fast up to date and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, this is an MS build based stack, and you can invoke all those operations from the command line. So with that clarification in mind, we don't have any plans to support a fundamentally different stack such as CMake. Even CMake with the Visual Studio generator on the back end to produce VCX proj files is difficult, because there's a lot of complexity in the MS build customization that we have for VCX proj files that is difficult to instrument through that abstraction layer of CMake. So we don't have any plans to implement support for CMake. Again, if you're looking to build in another IDE like VS Code, because it's MS build based, you shouldn't have any problem doing that, or debugging in any debugger that supports PDB files, that sort of thing. But there isn't any real dependency on Visual Studio today.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point too. I can highlight from experience on the Windows Community Toolkit is that we build in our Windows App SDK version in the CI on GitHub Actions with MS Build. So no Visual Studio UI there for us. So we are shipping bits outside of Visual Studio with that. Great. We have a few more questions here, and I think that will bring us to time. So our next question, and I believe that was for Mike, is around unsealing the default controls.
Yeah, so the big thing that has slowed us down from unsealing is just trying to make sure that we can preserve binary compatibility as part of that change. We have a plan in place for how we think we can do this. We actually have work scheduled in the 1.6 timeframe to unseal the items grid control. Assuming that works, then we'll probably proceed in 1.7 to try to unseal the rest of the controls. So at least we're making progress towards this, and hopefully we'll succeed in unsealing everything soon.
That's great. I know that's something we also used a lot in the toolkit. Was anything that's unsealed was a great building block for us to extend and add on to. So I know that issue's been there for a while, but it's awesome to hear that we're slowly making progress on that. And then for our next question is for Bob about the experimental releases, and about there was an issue in the experimental release that I think still made it to release. So is that something that you're aware of and working on? Bob, you're muted.
I got muted. Yes, this is something we are absolutely aware of, and it's something that has multiple facets that come into play. One of the things that we did really at the end of last summer was going through and taking all of the issues that were filed on GitHub and making it so instead of treating those separately, that we brought those into our internal bug database and made it so that we were triaging a single set of bugs. As a result of that, we went through and we have triaged the entire GitHub data issues list and brought those in. And we've been going through and addressing those and making sure that we have higher visibility into the issues that are filed. It was simply taking too long for an issue to come in before we recognized it and saw that, oh, that's a critical issue, and let's make sure and we get someone on it. And so we've greatly improved our ability to recognize that and get and be able to get a developer on that and fix those issues quickly. So that's the first part of the issue. A second part of the issue, one of the other things that Mike did not mention is in 1.6, we are putting a lot of resources on just improving our infrastructure and reducing the cost to get releases out the door. Today, we do an experimental release, and it's very early on in the cycle, and then we don't have another release. We move to preview releases and get that out. And by making it less expensive to get releases out the door, hopefully we can do more of those, and again, increase the ability to get feedback on those and have get the fixes out quicker. So it's really both parts of being able to see that the issue is there and get developers on it quickly, and then being able to get those into builds and be able to release those quicker. And long term, we want to be able to do more experimental releases so that it's not just early on in the cycle and then we go into and something I would love to get rid of is making it so that bug fixes are an experimental only for a while, and then you have to go back to stable again to get it. And we have purely a thing where if you want to use experimental, you use experimental. If you want to use a stable release, you use stable. And we have the ability to get fixes out quickly into both of those and on a regular cadence.
Thanks so much for Bob for all those insights. That's really good to know that these are all things that you're thinking of. There's just a lot of moving parts. So as everything, there's always a lot going on, but it's always great to hear that it's something that we're aware of, cognizant of, and moving forward towards making improvements in this space. So we have time for one more question. I see there's a ton of activity and enthusiasm in the chat, lots of questions. So I know we're not going to be able to get to them all today, but we will do our best to note all of them, follow up on GitHub, and do another follow-up discussion with answers to as many questions as we can try and answer afterwards. And so our final question for the day is from Dot Morton about how to support Capture Element to make webcam integration easier. And I believe this was going back to you, Mike.
Yep. So yeah, there's no plans to bring Capture Element itself to WinUI SDK, but using Media Player Element provides largely the same capability. We have a new sample that's in the WinUI 3 gallery at this point, demonstrating how to use that to easily connect up a media capture object through Media Player Element to do that rendering. So please take a look at that example. If there's something that it's missing, please post an issue on GitHub and we can evaluate that feedback.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And so I'm going to thank you all for answering our questions today. And I have a survey link to share with our audience here. So I'm going to just wave goodbye to all you all on the call. Thanks for joining me here answering questions. Really great to get some insights. And we'll go back here to just me. And here we go. So thank you all for joining us today. We have a survey link here about the call where you can provide more input on how this went with the revamped reboot here that we started this year for 2024. And so we also had the link to planning feedback from Mike, who will be updating that link to point to the GitHub discussion. And so I'm going to post those here in chat for folks as well. And so that was ams/WinUI/survey is the call survey link. And then we had the in-app SDK. I lost the note I made. Sorry. If someone can post in chat quick the link to the plans, that would be a big help for me. I believe it's that 1.6 planning roadmap feedback. So again, we plan to do the next call in June 5th, again at the same regular time, 9 a.m. Pacific, which would be 12 Eastern, and I'd be, believe, 1600 UTC. And I'm just grabbing, WinApp SDK/plans. Great. And so I've provided in the YouTube links or the comments, the links to those two links. This one, the survey on screen for feedback about the call, and the WinApp SDK/plans AKMS link for the 1.6 planning roadmap feedback. So Mike is going to have a discussion there that will list those plans that we had on the slide here, and you can provide input on those plans. And again, if we didn't get to your question today, we apologize. There's a lot of activity, always a lot of questions, but we'll do our best to follow up on those after this call on GitHub. And that's going to be the best place for you to engage with us or tweet at us at Windows UI. And that's going to be everything. So really appreciate everyone joining, and have a great day. Thanks again.